This is the story of two serial killers. One of them, Dr. Harold Shipman, killed hundreds of people before he was caught.
Dr. Shipman was present immediately prior to death and administered an injection and was there at the time of death.
But lessons learnt investigating Shipman meant the second killer, nurse Colin Norris, was stopped in his tracks.
You were also injecting a patient with insulin.
No, I wasn't. You're sitting there saying, you suspect, you presume, you blah, blah, blah.
Both men preyed on people they'd been trusted to look after. But what was it that drove them to kill?
I'm convinced that if Colin Norris hadn't have been stopped in his tracks, then he would have developed into being a serial killer of immense proportions, because I'm convinced he enjoyed killing people.
West Yorkshire, once the killing ground of Britain's most notorious multiple murderer, Dr. Harold Shipman. In 2002, police discovered they had another serial killer on their hands. Once again, he belonged to the medical profession, and once again the victims were elderly patients. Leeds General Infirmary, part of the biggest teaching hospital in Europe, was where they met their deaths. Ward 36 is a general orthopaedic ward. Every year, hundreds of people are treated here for broken bones. 86-year-old Ethel Hall was a typical patient.
She was a hard-working family person that had a shop, milk round, so she was well known within the village and the community. People used to say she was quiet, but when somebody upset her, they knew they had done.
At the time of her admission, Ethel was living at home with her husband, John.
They'd been married over 50 years. They married shortly after my dad came out of the army after the Second World War. And from there, they've lived locally ever since. She fell and broke her hip, so they rushed her into Leeds for a hip repair, which should have been a straightforward operation.
5 days after the surgery, Stuart visited his mother in hospital.
Oh, she was recovering well. She'd been sat in the chair, done a little bit of walking, talking, you know, reasonably active. She just wanted to come home. She was ready for home. She'd been in there long enough, she said.
That evening, Ethel took some painkillers and settled down for what she and her family thought would be an uneventful night. Nursing staff checked on her several times over the next few hours and found no signs that anything was wrong. But then, at around 5 a.m, they heard her coughing. 2 nurses and a care assistant went to her bedside.
She was like struggling to breathe because there was a choking sound and she was unresponsive really. We sat her up because she was kind of slumped in the bed a bit. Usually if someone's struggling to breathe, you'd sit them up. The care assistant got the suction, which is something you'd use if someone has like saliva in the mouth. You'd suction them to get rid of it to help with the airway. And we did our observations with a blood pressure machine. We administered oxygen and I went and called the doctor then.
Doctors were baffled. A patient on the road to recovery had suddenly gone into a coma. They ordered a blood test and discovered that her blood sugar or glucose level was so low that her brain had shut down. This might be expected in a diabetic patient whose body can't control blood sugar, but Ethel Hall did not suffer from diabetes.
It was early one morning, early in the morning, and they rang and just said mother had taken a turn for the worst and could we go down? So I rang my father and went straight down. I think you're in shock and you don't know what to say. You just got to sit and watch.
After several hours, doctors did manage to get Ethel's blood sugar level back to normal, but by then, it was too late. Her brain was permanently damaged.
We went and had a talk to a doctor in a separate room, and she said that Mum had a serious incident, but she didn't enlighten any further apart from those low blood sugars.
As medical inquiries continued, one member of staff developed a worrying theory.
I wonder whether she could somehow have been given an injection of insulin to cause the low blood sugar. It wasn't necessarily malicious. Patients are sometimes given the wrong medication, somebody else's medication. I mean, we just didn't know.
To determine whether Ethel had been injected with insulin, staff had to carry out special tests before the drug left her body. A full blood sample was ordered and senior hospital managers alerted.
If too much insulin had been injected, either that would have been done as an accident or would have been done as a purposeful act. So in either of those would be a very serious matter.
The blood samples were sent to a specialist testing centre in Surrey. There, Dr. Hall's suspicions were confirmed. Ethel had a huge amount of insulin in her system.
The insulin level was above 12,000 picomoles per litre. In a healthy individual, we wouldn't expect the insulin to be above 120 picomoles per litre. So the level in Mrs. Hall's sample was 100 times more than what we would normally expect.
That's a massive dose of insulin. And there's no way that MD would be taking anything like that. There are a few exceptional patients who have insulin resistance who need large doses, over 100 units maybe a day. But there is absolutely no conceivable way that you could overdose somebody with 1,000 units by chance or by accident.
The conclusion was alarming. Ethel Hall must have been deliberately attacked while in her hospital bed. The police were called in. And when Ethel died a few days later, their investigation became one of murder.
People die in hospital. Unfortunately, every day of the week people are dying, but they're not dying in these circumstances with a huge dose of pharmaceutical insulin in the system. That shouldn't happen, and so somebody has administered it. We've got to work out not only who's done it, but how's it happened.
Insulin is not considered to be a dangerous drug, and so legally it doesn't need to be locked up. On Ward 36, all the nurses had access to a fridge containing vials of insulin. Some had gone missing on the night Ethel Hall went into a coma. So police suspicion quickly fell on the staff who'd been caring for her that night. One person in particular stood out. But nurse Colin Norris had an answer for everything.
Obviously, if somebody was going to kill someone, they wouldn't leave their signature, would they?
What do you mean by that?
To say that they were there.
Murders are rare on hospital wards, but that's what police were investigating at Leeds General Infirmary in December 2002. 86-year-old patient Ethel Hall had been given a lethal dose of insulin, most probably by a member of the nursing staff.
I was very shocked to find out it was an intentional injection or an intentional attack on my mother. You don't expect that in hospital.
Suspicion fell on those working on Ward 36 the night Ethel Hall fell into a coma.
The great majority of our staff, the overwhelming majority of our staff, come to work in order to care for patients in one way or another. So to know that there's a possibility that a colleague has behaved in this way is devastating.
But for Chief Superintendent Chris Gregg, a detective with 30 years' experience, it was easier to believe.
I was aware that, there are at times criminals at work in every profession, not least the trusted world of the medical and nursing professions.
Chris Gregg's team quickly established that Ethel Hall's death was part of a pattern. In the previous 6 months, 2 other patients, Doris Ludlam and Bridget Burke, had also died unexpectedly after developing similar symptoms. But as both were elderly and suffering from a number of illnesses, neither death had caused suspicions at the time.
The hospital staff seemed to remember another couple of cases which had been not dissimilar to this. And so from the very start of the investigation, we thought we might not be dealing with an isolated incident here. There could be something serious and sinister happening.
The investigation team had few clues, but they were able to draw on invaluable experience. Just 18 months earlier, they'd conducted a detailed inquiry into the background of Britain's most notorious serial killer, Dr. Harold Shipman. On the 30th of April 2001, Detective Chief Superintendent Chris Gregg had ordered Shipman to be brought from prison. He'd already been convicted of murdering 15 patients, but was suspected of killing hundreds more. The police wanted to know exactly how many.
Right, this interview is being tape recorded. It may be given in evidence if your case is brought to trial.
This is the custody area at Halifax Police Station. This is where Harold Shipman was brought from prison the morning that we interviewed him.
Shipman's victims were all elderly, all injected with lethal doses of morphine. He killed the majority of them during his 20 years as a family doctor in Hyde, near Manchester. But it was as a young GP in Todmorden, West Yorkshire, that he'd first developed a taste for murder.
We wanted to bring Shipman here to Halifax, back into the patch where we suspected he started his killing spree. We needed to take him back in his memory to try and open him up, to get him talking about what happened here 25 years before.
The date is the 30th of April 2001 and the time is 16 minutes past 3 o'clock. We're in an interview room at Halifax Police Station.
Shipman was already serving a full life sentence. Nothing would be added by any new charges. But the police wanted to learn lessons from the past in case another figure like Shipman emerged in the future.
We know that Shipman certified 22 deaths in Todmorden, and from the work that we've done, we know that he was present or thereabouts of being present at 9 of those patients' deaths when they died. Now, that works out around 40% of occasions when he was present. Comparing that with 1% of the occasions when we know that GPs ordinarily are present at patients' deaths in their own home, it's a massive difference. And in my book, that's too much of a coincidence.
But if the police were hoping Shipman would open up, they were about to be disappointed. He turned his back on his past and the detectives.
Can you please state your name and date of birth? I understand from your legal representative that no replies are going to be given to any questions throughout the course of this interview and any other future interviews.
Only one psychiatrist has formally assessed Harold Shipman. Dr. Richard Badcock has a unique insight into why he behaved so bizarrely.
It's an extreme way of trying to maintain control of a situation, but also control of yourself, isn't it? And if you haven't got any depth to your ways of dealing with things, you know, if you've lost your depth of coping, then these things, you know, appear instinctive, and they may be primitive, but they're very effective.
Shipman was saying nothing, but after examining medical records and death certificates, detectives knew exactly who he had treated and if he had been there when they died.
Just to try and jog your memory, Dr. Shipman, I have here a photograph